Okay, gentlemen. Erev Shabbat Shalom. Class has been sponsored in memory of Osnat Bat Abigail. Ruach Adonai Tenehena Began Eden V'Ithi Nishmata Tzurura B'Sur Hayim. Amen. Parashat Vayechi. Okay, boys. So what I wanted to do tonight, something that I usually do, I feel like it's ignored a lot of times, and that is to just talk about the Haftarah for a moment. The Haftarah, what it focuses on is the end of the life of King David, of David HaMelech, and subsequently his sort of handing over the baton over to his son Shlomo. And the truth is, Rabotai, I'm not going to get into it because it's not the point of the shiur. But if you read Hebrew well and you're able to understand, I recommend everybody take a Doris Sion, which is Rabbi Ben Sion Mutzafi, which, by the way, his father's yahrzeit is this Tuesday night. Rabbi Salomon Mutzafi was a major and huge mikubal. He was a student of the Ben Ish Hai, direct student. It's not like he heard it from somebody else, that he was a direct student of the Ben Ish Hai. So he has a sefer called Doris Sion. I have it in my hands right here. I recommend to all our members. And he has a whole arichut. He has a whole lengthy essay. Exactly what was the koach, what was the power of the kingdom of King Solomon. It's really an unbelievable things he goes through. So much like mysticism, so much symbolism. Everything was so symbolic with King Solomon and with David HaMelech. And he has a whole essay. I'll just give you a couple examples. Again, it's not the point of the shiur, but since the Haftarah opens up with David HaMelech and King Solomon, he says over there, Rabbi Zion, and I'll read you the story in a second. He says that we have a piyut. What's a piyut? We have a poem. We have a song that we read on Shabbat. And that song, it's called El Adon. You know that song called El Adon? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. He points out something that people don't usually think of. But he says that the opening of El Adon, it has exactly 5 words in the opening. In the middle, he writes, it has 4 words. And towards the end of the Pesukim, it has 6. As an example, he says over here, he says, Im nasim lev, if we pay attention, leherkav hamishpatim shel piyut. If we begin counting the letters and the words inside this piyut, nivakach b'davar ma'anyen. We're going to find something interesting. B'mishpat hapoteach, in the Pesukim that open up the El Adon, kol chelek michil 5 milim. Each one has 5 words. What's the words? El Adon Al Kol HaMa'asim. Altogether, that's 5. Continue. Baruch Umvorach Bifi Kol Neshama. Again, that's 5 words. And then somewhere in the middle, Kol Shar Chelkei HaMishpatim Shel Piyut Michilim 4 milim Kol Echad. Each one is 4. Gadlo V'tuvo Ma'ale Olam. Period. That's 4. Dat Utvuna Sovevim Hodov. That's another 4. And then you continue. Until you get to the closing remarks of the piyut. Each one has 6 words. Shevach notnim lo kol tzeva maron. Next. Tiferet ugdula serafim v'hayot v'afonei hakodesh. Each one has 6. And asks Rabbi Sion Mutzafi, why is it that you have this combination of 5, 4, and then 6? It's amazing to me because something that we do every single Shabbat, and we're just reading it. It's a nice tune. You know, we sing. Maybe in the cold weather, it warms us up a little hazanut when we get to shul. But such a Ben Sion Mutzafi, everything is mechushban. There's an accounting for everything, and there's a great reason why the piyut starts with 5, then switches to 4, and then goes to 6. As an example, he writes, the reason why there's 4 in the middle is because it's a well-known thing, and he goes to, in great detail, he describes the chair of King Solomon. The chair of King Solomon had so much deep mysticism called the throne of Shlomo HaMelech that went through a lot of history, by the way. So the throne of Shlomo HaMelech, how many legs does the throne have? Obviously, it has 4 legs. So he says that this entire piyut, this entire song, is really mirumaz. It's hinting to us towards this throne of King Solomon. So the four words in the middle Pesukim of El Adon is hinting to us the 4 legs of King Solomon's throne. And he continues and he says the reason why there's 5 letters in the or 5 words in the beginning is because if you take God's name, which we all know, God's name of Chesed is Yud Kei Vav Kei. So the last letter of God's name is Hey, Yud Kei Vav Hey. So the Hey is at the end. Hey in Begamatria is is 5. That's why, by the way, human beings, how many fingers do we have? We have 5. There's a reason for that, by the way. Why didn't God create us with 6? Why not 7? Maybe it's going to be more convenient. The more fingers we have, the more things you're allowed to grab. The more fingers you have, the more, phones you'll be able to hold on to. Everything is considered mechushban. Everything has an accounting, and God had a reason why He gave us 5 fingers. The reason why we have 5 fingers, says Rabbi Mutzafi, is because God's name is Yud Kei Vav Kei, and the very end of God's name is a Hey. Hey, bigamatria, minumaz of 5, and that's why King Solomon put the 5 letters in the Elad, 5 words in the Eladon, in order to hint to us of the last letter of God's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. And then he says the reason why it's 6, again, towards the end, where you have 6 words per sentence, is because the 6 words are minubaz to how many steps King Solomon had on his throne. He had exactly 6 steps that are climbed up to his throne, and therefore the 6 steps is minumaz to these, to the way that he sat on his throne. And he says that, he didn't sit there alone. He goes through a whole essay over here that the truth is that you had King Solomon's throne, which again, Rabbi, I encourage everybody to read it because there's so much depth into it, how many animals he had, how many images of animals he had, lions and he had eagles, and it's really an amazing piece. But he says that he wasn't the only guy up there. He had his throne that was sitting, and besides his throne itself, on each side, he had another throne. And on one side, it was the job of the Kohen Gadol to sit there. On the other side, it was the job of the Sgan Kohen Gadol. That's like the assistant of the Kohen Gadol. So therefore, you had basically a Beit Din that sat upon. You had King Solomon, then you had Kohen Gadol, and you had Sgan Kohen Gadol. This was known as the Beit Din of Shlomo HaMelech. And each time a case came to him, obviously, Rabbi, we know of the famous case. What's the most famous case that came to King Solomon? With the babies, exactly. For those who don't remember that story, the babies case was basically about 2 women. And the 2 women, they were roommates. They shared an apartment together. And they both had a baby. Each one had a child. Each one had a baby boy. And in the middle of the night, they woke up one time, and one of the babies, it was smothered. It was killed in the middle of the night. And each one claimed the baby that was alive really belonged to her. And they couldn't sell it. So who do you go to? You go to Shlomo HaMelech. You go to King Solomon, and he's going to decide because he is the wisest of all men. And in his chokhmah, again, the Navi makes a big deal about this, and apparently this was heard. It was so famous that even Italian artists, they have pictures that are drawn. I looked it up today in Wikipedia. There's a gorgeous picture of King Solomon, Kilu, the whole court case over there, and how he wants to take this baby. He said, no problem. If each of you deserve or think you deserve this child, I have a solution. I unsheath my sword and I split the baby in half. You get one half and you get the other. And what was the reaction of the true mother? Reaction of the true mother was, don't split the baby in half. Let her have it. And through King Solomon's chokhmah, through his wisdom, he realized that the true mother of this child will never want to split the baby. The other mother whose baby was in it, she says to herself, if I can't have it, then nobody could have it. And therefore, split the baby, I have no issue. But King Solomon said, I will reveal the true mother through my intent. And therefore, that is obviously the story that we all know. He brings out another story. Again, doesn't have any nafkamina, but he tells a beautiful story. He says over here, listen to a story. Maaseh b'Yehudi. There was a story with a Jew. Shalach midbar. He was walking in the desert. Ubiado kad chalav. He was walking with a pitcher of milk in his hands. Pagash bo nahash. All of a sudden, I'm not reading in the source now. I didn't get to the source sheet right now. I'm reading through a book. And he says, Pagash bo nahash. He met a snake. Sha'ala nahash. And the snake began to talk to him. And he says, Ma yesh bekad. What do you have in your pitcher? He returns, Chalav, I have milk. Amalo Nahash, the Nahash tells him, Tzemeh ani, I am thirsty. Im titen li dishtot, agle lecha hechad tamun matmon gadol. If you give me something to drink, I will reveal to you where there is a big treasure. Would you trust the Nahash if he told you something like that? No, never trust the snake. Never trust the snake. And plus he's talking. What is he doing talking? Ha'ish haya peti v'hiskim. The man, he was gullible. And he agreed. After he gave the Nachash to drink from his pitcher, so the snake brought him to a rock. Amar lo, pick up the rock. There was a buried treasure buried under this rock. He was very happy the fact that he found this treasure. He took it and he brought it to his city. Before he got to his city, he got up and he wrapped himself around the neck of the man in order to strangle him. The man said, what's going on over here? Why are you hurting me? Nachash, give me back the treasure, it belongs to me. What are you talking about? We had a deal. I would give you the drink and you would give me the matmon. But the Nachash did not give up. So what do they do? Who do you go to if you can't decide who does it belong to? You go to King Solomon. It was in the times of King Solomon. There's a judge and there's justice. Anybody that knew they had a fight, you go to Shlomo HaMelech. So what happened? The man is suing the snake. He tells him, I want you to show up in court. I'll see you in court, as they say. Let King Solomon judge the case. So the two men, not the men, but one guy and the snake, he went El Armon Shlomo, to the castle of Shlomo. And he went with his empty pitcher of milk. And what happens? He went walking with the Nachash wrapped around his neck. He gets Zivu Hashnayim of Melech. They came in front of the king. Shlomo HaMelech Yashav al Kiso, and King Solomon sat on this gorgeous throne that we're talking about. Mimino Kohen Gadol, and his right hand was the high priest. Usmanos Gan Kohen, and the left was the assistant to the priest. The man explained the story, and he claimed what he had to claim. So he turned to the snake and he said, what do you have to say for yourself? The snake admitted, whatever the man said is true. We had a deal, I drank from the milk, and I revealed to him a great treasure. But he said, bottom line is, from the Bible, I have a right to kill the man. He says, really, why? Because it clearly says in the Bible, on one of the very first pages, Ve'ata tishufenu akev, that the curse of the snake is that the snake will always have the ability to bite the man. And therefore said the snake, I'm just doing my job. I'm just doing what I was created to do, and that is to outsmart the human and to kill him. So the King Solomon told the snake, you fool, before you read to me the end of that verse, you have to fulfill what's written in the beginning. What does it say in the beginning of that verse? What do the human beings do to the snake? That he's going to be in charge of your head. So the man took a stick, he took a sword. He took the sword, he hit the snake on the head, and he decapitated him. And now you didn't have anybody to fulfill the ending of the verse. The reason why he tells us the story, because again, you have to know the wisdom of King Solomon and what kind of renaissance he created in the world was that everybody was afraid of Shlomo HaMelech. Not only that, but the Gemara tells us that Shlomo HaMelech was such a great king, not only was he the ruler of the world, but the Gemara says he ruled over not only the Tachtonim, not only human beings, but also over the Elyonim. He was a king over the angels and the demons as well. So therefore, Haftarah, in this week's parasha, Vayechi, begins off telling us the story about David and his son Shlomo HaMelech. My question is, and this is the question of the night, we have to know something, that anytime you have a Torah and a Haftarah, you have to ask yourself, what is the connection? Why do we ask that question? It's because back in the day when we had enemies, our enemies, they made a decree. The decree was, Jewish people, you cannot read Torah. Therefore, no more Torah for you. And therefore, in order for us to remember what's written, our rabbis made another law. And the law was, you have to read part of the Navi. The only thing that was forbidden for us was the 5 books of Moses. Meaning to say, Torah, our enemies told us, you could not read Torah. But Navi, they never said. And therefore, the rabbis, in their ingenious, they said, in order for us not to forget what's written inside the Torah, we're going to read a story in the Navi, a story in the prophets. And that story is going to be very similar to what that week's parasha is in order for us to make the connection so we don't forget. And here's the question, Rabotai. The question is, what does the Haftarah of David HaMelech and King Shlomo have to do with Parashat Vayechi? Look at the very first source in the Torah, in the sheets. It says in the opening of this week's Haftarah, Vayikrevu Yemei David Lamut, in the time of David came to die, V'yitzav et Shlomo beno lemor, he commanded his son, saying, Anochi holech bederech kol haaretz. I'm going to do what everybody does. Bederech kol haaretz. Whatever the people do, whatever the life cycle is. You're born and you die. I'm going to fulfill the end of my life cycle. I'm going to die. V'hazakta v'hayita le'ish. Please be strong and please be a man. And the question is, Rabotai, again, what is the connection between David HaMelech and his son Shlomo to Vayechi Yaakov, to the life and the brachot that Yaakov Avinu gives in this week's parasha? Is the question clear? Rabotai, I want you to pay attention to a Zohar HaKadosh that I found. B'siyata d'shmaya. The Zohar HaKadosh says in source number 2, something that maybe you know, but I didn't know what until I read it. The Zohar says a fascinating piece. He comes along and he writes, look inside, Rabbatai, the Zohar HaKadosh, he has the ability to cleanse your soul. The rabbis tell us, especially the Haidat, he writes that reading the Zohar is the highest form of learning a person could do. And just by reading the words, even though you don't understand what's written, it brings a certain purity and clarity to your mind. That's why there's what's called Zohar Yomi. You heard of Daf Yomi before? You heard of Halacha Yomi before? There's such called of Zohar Yomi, where there's a little small book, and the small book is split of how many pages of Zohar you have to read. Even though you just go ahead and you open the book and you just read the Zohar, just reading the Zohar, I have no idea what he's talking about, but just reading it is a tremendous benefit to your soul. Therefore, look inside, because I quoted you a piece of Zohar from Parashat Vayishlach. Says the Zohar, Vadai, Abraham shavak le chamesh shinin. We know that Abraham, at what age did Abraham Avinu die? Anybody know? 175. Truth is, says the Zohar, he died 5 years before his time. He was really supposed to live to the ripe old age of 180. Chaim, are you listening? It's a big piece. He says, Yitzchak lived 180. Yeah, like Yitzchak. No, truth is, he was supposed to be like Abraham. But Abraham was minus by 5. Abraham was supposed to be 180. So was Yitzchak, so was Yaakov. Says the Zohar, he should have lived 180 years. But he only lived 175, hasirim hamesh, minus 5 years. Why did Avraham Avinu pass away 5 years early, gentlemen? Anybody know? Esav. That's the simple interpretation. That's the way I always thought. The reason why Avraham passed away early is because at this point in time, at his age, Esav was born. And Esav was around 13, 15 machloket. And since at this point in time, Esav, he left the path. He left the path of Judaism and how he began to do sins. He was over Gilui Arayot, Shifchut Damim, Avodah Zarah. He did all the cardinal sins. And in order for Abraham Avinu not to see his grandson go off the derech, Hashem did a chesed with Abraham. He said, I don't want my great creation Abraham to be pained over the fact that his grandson has left the fold, and therefore I'm going to take him away 5 years early in order for him not to see it. That's why in Parasha it tells us that Yaakov Avinu was cooking the lentil soup. Why was he cooking lentils? To give it to his father Yitzchak. Is because we know that in Hilchot Avilut, in the laws of mourning, when a person dies, you feed your children round foods. Minhag today is to eat eggs, because egg is a round food, but lentils also fulfills that purpose of round foods. Why do we eat round foods by what's called the Sudat Havra'ah, by the first meal after you bury the dead? Is because, like Roman said, it's round. And the reason why it's round, because round, it symbolizes life, that everything is a circle. You live and you die, but also at the same time, the egg or the lentil has no mouth. There's no opening to the egg or the lentil. In order to tell us that when a person dies, we shtok. We be quiet. Whatever God's plan is, we have nothing to say on God's plan. That's why we make the bracha. Baruch Daina Emet. We bless God the fact that He did. Hashem Natan, Hashem Lakach, Yehi Hashem Mevorach. That God's name should be blessed. But anyway, so at that point, Yaakov was making lentils because at this point, Abraham Avinu died, and he was giving this lentil soup to his father in order to console him. So again, Abraham Avinu was taken 5 years prior. Why? Because he didn't want to see his grandson go off the path. That's what I thought. That's not what the Zohar says. We continue. Says the Zohar. So what age did Abraham die? 175. Says the Zohar. Yaakov. The truth is, Yaakov should have lived the amount of times that Abraham lived. Abraham lived until 175. Technically, Yaakov should have lived the same amount, 175. However, we know this week's parasha, he did not live until 175. What did he live to? No. 147. Chazak Baruch. Says the Zohar, he only lived for 147 years. Hasirim temanya ve'esrim. If I were to take away 175 from 147, how many years did I get that he missed the years of Abraham? Altogether, it's 28 years. He had 28 years to go until he would have lived until the life of Abraham. So far we have in the bank, we have Abraham's 5, that he didn't live until 180, he died at 175, and we have Yaakov's 28, because he was supposed to live to 175, but only lived until 147. Says the Zohar, Ishtakhu. Comes out, the Abraham ve Yaakov shavku le mechayihon tlatin utlat shinin. Altogether, 28 plus 5, it's 33 years. Put that number aside because that number is going to be important. So altogether between the years of Abraham and Yaakov that they were supposed to live to, but they missed out, that's 33 years. Says the Zohar HaKadosh, Yosef, now we're moving to Yosef, Ditkayem me'ad ve'eser shanim. How long did Yosef live to when he died? Which he also died in this week's parasha? 110 was the years of Yosef. And Yosef was supposed to live to 147 like his father. So it turns out how many years are missing between Yosef and Yaakov? 147 minus 110. Hazaku Baruch, says the Zohar HaKadosh, so altogether from Yosef's life, it's 37 years. Says the Zohar, for 37, the years of Yosef between Yosef and Yaakov, and the 33 between Yaakov and Abraham, altogether 33 plus 37, 70. What do we do with those 70 years? Says the Zohar HaKadosh. Adam Rishon. Says the Zohar HaKadosh, Ha-shiv'in shinin dishavku le David Malka. These are the 70 years that they actually donated to David HaMelech. Li'itkayama behon, to live with those years. Ubihu itkayem David bechol inun shinin dishavku le Abahan. Whatever years the Avot didn't live, they, so to speak, they donated their time over to King David. Now I know what you're going to ask me. You say, hold on a second. Chaim's great question. I thought it was from Adam Rishon. We're gonna get to that in a minute. But right now, go back to answer the original question. We begin to see at least some sort of similarity between the Haftarah and Parashat HaShavua. Because I asked, the question that we asked is, there's always going to be a connection between Haftarah and Parashat. Haftarah talks about the death of David. Parashat talks about the death of Yaakov. But now that I know from the Zohar that Yaakov actually gave over 28 years of his life towards David, now I understand why the Haftarah tells me about the death of David and Parashat tells me about the death of Yaakov, because the two turns out are intimately connected. Maybe, just maybe. But now let's address the elephant in the room, which is Chaim's question. But hold on a second. Anybody that grows up with a yeshiva background knows that who Bemet donated time from his life over to David HaMelech. It wasn't the forefathers. It was Adam Rishon. So what's that source? What's the source that Adam Rishon gave over his life to David HaMelech? The truth is, the exact Zohar that I quoted you is the Zohar right before this. The Zohar right before this Zohar says that who was the contributor towards David HaMelech's life? It was Adam. And we can see that inside. The same exact source number 2. Second paragraph. Kevan debara Adam Harishon Amar Ha-vadai kiyumei. Adam saw it in his wisdom that David HaMelech is gonna die the moment he's born. We're gonna discuss why in a second David HaMelech had a time frame on his life. But Adam Rishon came along and he said, listen, I have plenty to spare. I have 1,000 years. And therefore, what's the big deal that I give him 70? Says the Zohar HaKadosh, Ume'adam kadma'a havu shiv'in shinin, di'ikayam David Malka be'alma. So now we have a contradiction. Which one is it? Who donated who? Did the Avot, did Abraham, Yaakov, and Yosef deliver to David? Or was it Adam Harishon?
Adam was supposed to give it to the Avot, and then instead he decided to give it to David.
So it's clear at this point that someone donated. Somebody donated, that's why he lived. But again, the question is, why did David HaMelech have to have this ticker on his heart that, listen, the moment he's born, he has to die right away? What's Peshat? We never asked that question. We always knew that Adam Rishon donated and David HaMelech lived until he was 70. There's a gorgeous Gemara about that.
He was supposed to be alive.
But why, Chaim? You have to ask that question. If he's King David, we know King David as one of the greatest characters in our religion. In fact, there's a Gemara somewhere that says, it's in Moed Katan.
Because he was supposed to be somebody
You
bad.
just said 2 minutes ago not to
He
question
changed
that.
himself.
Well, not to question death.
Huh?
No.
when somebody dies, more like in our time, you could say, we don't question why. But why, as we know, the way that we were educated, David HaMelech was supposed to have only one day. And we have to ask ourselves why. Why was his time limit only one
He
day?
was probably destined.
Why was he destined?
To somebody bad.
Someone that holy can
And-
survive in this world.
Let's get to it, says the Arizal. Arizal says in his Lukutim, he says that David HaMelech was the Gigul of Adam. He had a piece of the soul of Adam. Why is it important information? It's important because God tells Adam HaRishon, from the day that he eats from the tree, let's read it inside. The third source. What does the third source say? U'me'etz hadat tov v'ra lo tuchal mimenu. Do not eat from the tree of knowledge. Why? Ki biyom achalcha. Because on the day that you eat it, mot tamut. You shall die. Rabotai, the day that Adam HaRishon ate from the tree, did he die? No, he did not die. He lived 1,000 years. So what is going on over here? Why would God tell him something and not fulfill it? He told Adam HaRishon, you have to die on the first day you eat it. But Adam HaRishon lived 1,000 years. So what's Peshat? Peshat is that there's different definitions of a day. There's the day that we hold of 24 hours, and there's a day in God's life. How long is a day in God's life? Says King David in Tehillim, in source number 4, Ki elef shanim be'einecha Kiyom. 1,000 years in your life, in a God's life, it's one day. So therefore, God did a tremendous chesed over to Adam HaRishon. He promised Adam HaRishon, on the day you eat from a tree, you're going to die. Adam ate from the tree. Says God, I have to fulfill the hidden meaning of this verse, but instead of giving it to him in the literal sense, I'm going to give it to him in my timeline. So therefore, God said, Adam HaRishon, you will live 1,000 years. Because again, 1,000 years in God's life, like we have dogi years, have deal. So therefore, God's years is one day. Oh, but at the same time, says the Arizal, that God, bottom line, said one day. And therefore, God said, I have to fulfill that one day in its literal sense. But I can't give it to Adam, because Adam lived 1,000 years. So how is the curse of God of the day you eat from the tree, ki biyom achelcha mimenu mot yumat, how is that going to come true in the literal sense? Says the Arizal, I'll tell you how. Through David HaMelech. Because since David HaMelech is the Gilgul of Adam, technically speaking, it's like David who did the sin. Therefore God said, the moment David is going to be born, I'm going to fulfill the curse of Adam in the literal sense. Therefore David, the moment he's born, he must die. On the day that you're born, you're going to die. And that's why it says the Arizal, if you look back at the Pasuk, how many languages does it use of death in referring to Adam? Again, look back at source number 3. It says, Ki biyom achelcha mimenu mot tamut. What is mot tamut? It's a double language. Just say tamut. Ma se mot tamut. You're going to die, but you're going to die twice. Says the Arizal, because it was considered 2 deaths. It was the death of Adam, and it was the death of David. So until this point now, he says, now we understand why did David HaMelech have to die on the day that he was born? Because since he was the Gigul of Adam HaRishon, and since God promised Adam from the day you eat from the tree, you're going to die. So he fulfilled this curse in 2 ways. The literal sense of the day that you eat it, you're going to die. The day David was born, he must die. And then he fulfilled it in the not so literal sense, where he allowed Adam HaRishon to live 1,000 years. That's why, by the way, if you pay attention to Tehillim, David HaMelech was very grateful to Adam HaRishon. We read it on Shabbat every single week. What do we say? David HaMelech is praising. He says the words, Ki ma'aseh yadecha aranen. Right? In the Mizmor of Shabbat. Ma'aseh, Ki smachtani bepo'alecha, b'ma'aseh yadecha aranen. That I shall take pleasure or joy in ma'aseh yadecha, in what you created with your hands. Who's the only human being that God created with his hands? Adam HaRishon. Everybody else was born through a woman. So therefore, when David HaMelech says, Ki b'ma'aseh yadecha aranein, I hereby take pleasure and joy in your ma'aseh yadecha, he was referring to Adam HaRishon, because since Adam gave him the 70 years of life as a gift, he fulfilled the unliteral sense of death in 1,000 years, but I was supposed to die because I'm his Gilgul. But again, everybody donated either the Avot or Adam HaRishon. But now we have to get to the class. The class is, who Bemet did it? It's a stira in the Zohar. One piece of Zohar is telling me it was Abraham, Yaakov, and Yosef, and another Zohar tells me it was Adam Rishon. Well, which one was it? Was it the Avot, or was it Adam Rishon? The question clear, Rabotai? Look at source number 5, Ben Ishai. Ben Ishai in his Ben Yoyada, and Masechet Shabbat Daf Lamed Aleph. He says as follows. He says, Yadua, it's well known, Shenatan Adam Rishon Ayin Shana, that Adam Rishon, he gave 70 years of his life. However, says the Ben Ishai, Aval Hu Hitcharet Alehem. He regretted it. What does that mean? You know what it's like when you have a guy that has a lot of money, and then all of a sudden, because he has so much, he's very generous with it. He gives $1 million over here, he gives a couple of $1 million over here. But the moment he becomes bankrupt, he says to himself, "Oi, I wish I didn't give away so much of my money." The moment you don't have, if a person has a lot of something, he doesn't mind spreading it. But the moment you run out of that something, you regret giving away the things that you did. Adam Rishon in the beginning, when he promised God, no problem, 70 years on me. How many years did he have? He had 1,000. The guy had plenty of life when he gave over 70 years. But all of a sudden, on his 929th birthday, when God says, Habibi, you have 1 year left to live. All of a sudden, Adam Rishon says, nobody wants to die. And he says to himself, God, maybe the 70 years that I gave, maybe I want it back. So therefore, as a backup, Kiviyachol, because Adam Rishon, he regretted, but as a backup, God says, you know what? If you don't want to give, I have other donors. Who are those donors? It's going to be Abraham, it's going to be Yaakov, and it's going to be Yosef. So that's the answer to the Ben Ishai. It's a cute answer. Bottom line is, what?
They both gave it up, so it's supposed to be 140.
Time out. At least according to the Ben Ishai's understanding, Adam Rishon regretted. He took it. I guess he died. I guess it had to go somewhere. But bottom line is, he regretted because he regretted the Avot they stepped in. That's the answer of the Ben Ishai. Very good. Hazaku Baruch. The moment a person regrets, that's why by the Akedah, right? It's a very important point. Why do you have Hayasara follow Akedah? Because the Satan tried to convince Sarah that the reason why Yitzhak is not coming back is because Abraham was slaughtering him on the Mizbeach. And because of that shock of the news, she died. So he came to Abraham and he said, you know why your wife died? It's because of you. It's because of the Akedah. He tried to get Abraham to regret the Akedah. By regretting it, what happens? You lose the mitzvah. The moment you regret to do a mitzvah, Hashem takes it away from you. Therefore, Rabbi, he says, that's a lesson, tremendous lesson. When you regret a mitzvah, Hashem takes away the reward for it. So therefore, Satan knew the tremendous amount of reward we're going to get for the Akedah. He tried to get Abraham to regret, to have harata on it. Once that happens, he loses it. So what happens? Adam, he regrets the money, the donation, and therefore he doesn't give it over. We have backup donors. We have Abraham, we have Yaakov, we have Yosef. That's answer the Ben Ishai. But a much more beautiful answer, Rabotai. This comes from the Haidah. The Haidah bases his piece on the Gemara Brachot Daf Gimel. The Gemara says the life of King David was very special. Why was it so special? It's because David HaMelech was so committed, he was so determined to serve God in the best of his ability that David HaMelech barely slept. Gemara says on source number 6, Amar Rabbi Aha, Hachi Kama David. This is what David said. Me'olam lo avar alai chasot halayla b'sheina. In my lifetime, I never slept. There was no chatzot halayla. There was no midnight that I was caught sleeping. Rabbi Zera Amar, Ar Chatzot HaLayla Hayab Mitnamneim Kisus. The truth is, even before Chatzot HaLayla, David HaMelech was never fully sleeping, Chaim. He was Mitnamneim Kisus. He was dozing off like a horse, because the horse never really sleeps. However, Mikan Ve'elech Hayab Mitgaber Ka'ari. But after Chatzot, he would get up like a lion and he would learn Torah. So therefore, even at the time that David HaMelech was technically sleeping, he wasn't really sleeping. He was just dozing off. But after Chatzot, he'll wake up like a lion. Says the Gemara, David Simna Havale. David had an alarm clock, how to wake up. Amar Rabbi Aha bar Biznam. Amar Rabbi Shimon Hasida. Kinor hayat loy lemala mitato David. There was a kinor. What's a kinor, gentlemen? Kinor is a harp, a violin that was suspended on the top of his bed. And any time the wind would come in through his window, it would play the harp, and by playing the harp, that would be his alarm clock. They came in Shegia Chatzot HaLayla. The moment Chatzot came along, Baruch Tzifonit, the northern wind would come along, V'noshevet bo umeragen alav. It would hit the harp would make a sound. Immediately David HaMelech would get up, and he will learn Torah all the way to Amud HaShachar. Says the rabbis, the reason why David was so against sleep is like I told you before, based on the Arizal, that because David HaMelech was the tikkun, because David HaMelech was the gigul of Adam, he has to do things in his life that fix the sin of Adam. The biggest sin that Adam caused was he brought, what did he bring upon the world, gentlemen? Brought death upon the world. Therefore, whatever Adam Rishon caused, David HaMelech symbolically he has to fix. What is symbolic to death in this lifetime? Sleep, Hazaku Baruch. Yeah, 160th of death, the Gemara says. So therefore, in order to, since David is the Gilgul of Adam, he has to fix the sin of Adam Rishon. Therefore, since Adam brought death upon the world, David HaMelech has to be mima'et. He has to minimize death in the world. Therefore, by minimizing death upon the world, how does he do it? He doesn't sleep. Continuing in the Arizal says, that's why the ultimate tikkun of Mashiach is going to be Tichiyat HaMetim. He's going to resurrect the dead. Why? Because again, Mashiach is also the tikkun of Adam. Since Adam brought death upon the world, the main goal and purpose of the Mashiach is to resurrect the dead. That's why it says the Arizal, no coincidence, that the name Adam, Aleph, Dalid, Mem. Aleph is Adam, Dalid is David, Mem is Mashiach, Hazaku Baruch. Because the three tikkunim is all built into one person. Adam, acronym, Rosh Tevot, Adam, David, Mashiach. Because it's only one person. It's all combined in order for us to say that this is the proper tikkun, and without it, the tikkun is not going to be made. So it turns out in the Gemara, if David HaMelech never technically slept, we have to measure our lives the way that people do. And therefore, if a person sleeps, let's say 6 to 8 hours, and he's living the rest, he lives 70 years. However, if I take away the sleep that I'm supposed to have, add in the sleep to my years of life. If David HaMelech didn't sleep at night, turns out that he actually extended his life more than anybody else. We sleep, we lose our time. King David didn't sleep, he gained time.
Utilize every moment of the 70.
He utilized every single moment of the 70, but it's more than that. It's more than that because he didn't sleep. Therefore, since he didn't sleep, we're going to take that into account and we're going to add that to years of his life. Says the Hidah, look in the next source, number 7, unbelievable, the Hidah. He says, Be'im Ken, if this is the fact, if the Gemara is right, which it is, that it says that King David did not sleep, Im Ken, David HaMelech, lo haya yoshen klal. King David did not sleep. V'lo ta'am tamita, nor did he taste the taste of death, which is sleeping. V'nimtza, turns out, says the Hidah, shechai ayin shanim min hayamim, ve'ayin shanim min halelot. He lived 70 years of day and 70 years at night. Altogether, David HaMelech lived, if we're keeping the count, 140 years of life. If that's the case, says the Hidah, it's no more question against the Zohar. The Zohar, you made a contradiction in yourself. At one point, you tell me that the Avot donated, that Abraham, Yaakov, Yosef, they donated 70, and then comes Adam Rishon, he also donated 70. Which one is it? Is it Adam? Is it the Avot? The answer is Hazaku Baruch. You woke up, Chaim. It's both. It's 70 from this, 70 from that, 140 all together. And that's genius. What an answer of the Hidah. Because now he settles the contradiction in the Zohar, and now the kesher, the connection between parasha and haftarah is very clear. The fact that our parasha talks about the life and the death of Yaakov, and the haftarah talks about the life and death of David, the two are very intimately connected. Because just like Yaakov gave donation of his life to David, now everything makes sense. That's why it says Rabbi Yaakov Abu Hatzera, Rabbi Yaakov. He says no coincidence. There's in Torah, you could be Doresh called Semichut. Chaim, what's Semichut? You know what that is, Semichut? You could be Doresh, you could ask a question, why is one item written next to another item? You could say, in the newspaper you can't say that. You can't say, why is the Yankee game right next to the weather? It's just because that's the way the editor wanted it. But in Torah you could ask, why is Parasha at the end of Vayigash next to Parasha of Vayechi Yaakov? Not only that, but there's an even bigger question. If anybody's paying attention to the Sefer Torah this week, it's Satum. What does Satum mean? When you start a new Parasha, you always begin a new paragraph.
Only one.
Like they told you in school, when you're typing, when you start a new paragraph, you have to indent. You have to press that enter and it skips a line. In Torah, it's usually supposed to be the same. Parashat Vayechi is one of those rare times where it's not indented. That's why you have to actually look in the Sefer Torah in order to find it, because it's in the middle of a sentence. Why is it? What is the connection between the end of Vayigash and Vayechi? And why is Vayechi Satum? Says Rabbi Yaakov Abu Hatzera. Pay attention, the very last source, number 8. The very last word in Parashat Vayigash is Vayechi Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen v'yehazu ba v'yifru v'yirbu me'od. The last letter is me'od. And the very first letter of Parashat Vayechi is Vayechi Yaakov. Is it a coincidence, gentlemen, that the word me'od is the same letters as Adam? The same letters of me'od is Mashiach, Adam, David. And the very next line is what? Vayechi. Who's the next one? Yaakov. Because it turns out that everybody is intimately and deeply connected between each other, because it was Yaakov, it was the forefathers, it was Adam that gave life to David, because without them, David Melech would not have been around. And not only that, but also what do we say? We say David Melech Chai v'kayam, that he's always going to be alive. What does the Gemara say by Yaakov? Gemara in Megillah, it says Yaakov Avinu lo met. He never died. He was in bold, but he never actually died. Big connection. David HaMelech Chai v'kayam, Yaakov lo met. Coincidentally, says the Abir Yaakov, if you take the gematria of Yechi, not Vayechi, but Yechi Yaakov, it's Yud, which is 20, and Het is 8. Altogether, it's 28. How many years did Yaakov donate to the Bir HaMelech? 28 years. Hazaku Baruch. Unbelievable Peshat by the Haidah and the Abu Hatzera, Rabbi Yaakov Abu Hatzera in his Abir Yaakov. He says that is a very deep connection between the Parashot HaShavua. That's why it's Satum, that's why they're next to each other, all in order to be Merumaz, all in order to hint to us that is the Chokhmah of the Torah, that was able to put everything in the right place in order to tell us that this is the way it's supposed to be. And the Musar of David HaMelech, right? The Musar of him is obviously that he took advantage, like Chaim said, he took advantage of every moment. If it wasn't for the fact that he took advantage, then we would have had a steer on the Zohar. What do? One is 70, the other one is 70. The truth is, because he took advantage of every single time of his life, he was able to say that not only did I live 70 years, but I lived 140 years. Because I was able to utilize my time and use it as a great example. That's why I lived for such a long time. Just to end, I saw a great story in Rabbi Puzansky. He says, on the topic of utilizing your time, he said a story about a high school boy. He was a senior. And he said to himself, he said, like most seniors in high school, they want to take advantage of their final years as young kids, and therefore they want to do shtuyot, they want to play around. And this senior, maybe coincidentally, not coincidentally, his name happened to be David. And he said that David, right before his graduation, his high school was taking him on a senior trip. He said to himself, this is one of my last hurrahs. I'm going to make it the best senior trip that I can make. But unfortunately or fortunately, the high school decided to take them on a trip to Poland. That was going to be their senior trip. And Poland is usually a little more solemn, a little more, because obviously what are you going to do in Poland, gentlemen? What are you going to do in Poland? You're taking them around to the mouse graves, you're going to take them around to, Holocaust memorabilia, etc., etc. So he came along and he said that I was planning on my senior trip, it's going to be a great time. But it turns out, instead of taking us to Florida or to California, which was the trip in the previous years, they took us to Poland. I can't say it as well as the story, so I'm going to read it inside. It is unbelievable, and with this I'm going to end. He says, my actual experience, however, was far different from anything I could have expected. Our itinerary took us to various locations around Eastern Europe. We visited small towns and major cities that once been filled with vibrant Jewish community. We saw the empty shells of beautiful synagogues and marketplaces that were once populated by Jewish merchants. There was a haunting emptiness to it. I can almost picture the bustling crowds of Jews half a century ago, going about their daily lives, but I struggled to blink away the images and banish the sad nostalgia building in my heart. This was our senior trip, after all. Ultimately, though, my effort to remain as a carefree tourist, was in vain. It ended as I passed through the gates of Auschwitz under the infamous sign declaring, with a sadistic irony, that Arbeit macht frei. What does that mean? Labor makes you free. From that moment, all pretenses fell away. Suddenly, the many tales of the Holocaust swam to life before my eyes. I could hear the rattle of cattle cars arriving on the tracks and smell the dank despair of the human beings within them in the fresh air, tightly packed together, unaware of what awaited for them. After having already undergone deprivation and emotional torture, it must have been especially horrible for those arriving Jews to discover, as they blinked in the sun and stretched their cramped limbs, that their troubles had only just begun. Silent, lost in thought. I could all but hear the girdle bark of German orders to confuse masses of their victims. I pictured the snarling dogs leaping at terrifying prisoners as the Nazis compelled them to form lines, trying to create some sort of method to their madness. I imagined those lines, the worried mothers holding tightly to their children as they passed beneath the clinical gaze of a single man who was human on the outside and something else entirely underneath. The man beckoned them to left with a single casual flick of the wrist. Perhaps those mothers felt momentarily relieved, believing that they were be housed somewhere with their children. But history has taught us that where they were destined to go. I moved onward to the site of the gas chambers, fury and disgust welling in my heart. Tears blurred my vision as I felt the soft wind blowing around me. I imagined I could still smell the stench of death. It was then, near the barracks closest to the gas chambers, that I found a handprint on the wall. It was hard to see at first, for it was faded with time, but it was unmistakably the fingerprints of a grasping human hand. I stared at this puzzlement, and then, in a flash, I knew that something had happened. The building on which I found the print was my guide, and I explained a holding area for the Jews marked for death in the gas chambers. I could picture the owner of that hand, grasping tightly to the corner of that building, struggling to find a lifeline as he was mercilessly compelled to go to his death. My racing mind imaged the promises he must have had made to Hashem in that moment, to resolve to live his life right, to do anything God had asked him in exchange for a chance to survive just for a few more minutes. Perhaps he had dreamed of building a family and raising Torah true children. Yet in the several crowded moments, the Nazis snuffed out all those dreams. Something else happened in me then, an awakening, said David. I realized how powerful a gift is, the gift of life. And tremblingly, I realized that it's something I'd never truly taken seriously. I was only 18 years old, and my life stretched endlessly ahead of me. Now was the time to have fun. I could be young only once. I'd never been a serious student in yeshiva. There was always too much to do, too many distractions that were, to me, so much more important than the stuffy Beit Midrash. But there, standing before me, that handprint. I asked myself, why exactly should my life be any less precious than that of this unknown Jew? Why should I fritter away my time on foolishness when only 50 years before, 70 years before, stood a Jew that was dragged to his death, wishing that he could have just a couple more moments to perform any mitzvah possible? I decided that a change was necessary, and I implemented this change right away after returning to my yeshiva. My old motto might have been, life is too short. Have as much fun as you can. But my new one was, every second counts. I applied myself to my learning in a way that I never had before and began to gain reputation as a devoted matmid, a guy that cares about his learning. It wasn't titles that I was after, though in a life of which every moment is a precious gift. There's so much more to accomplish. I want to utilize every minute of every day in a meaningful way. What a lesson of David HaMelech. And he ends up by quoting Rabbi Pincus. Rabbi Pincus comments, the man who grasped at that wall did more than gain a few extra seconds of life. He changed another man's life completely. That Jew, that anonymous Jew that died, that was holding onto that wall, that his handprint is there right now, he never would have dreamed in 100 years from now it's going to be affecting other people's life. He accomplished more than he ever could dreamed. It goes only to show that every moment in life is truly priceless. An unbelievable lesson of David HaMelech, that even though he was allotted a certain amount of time, but because he took advantage of every second, not only did he live 70 years, he lived double 140. It reminds me what the Torah tells us. Abraham, Zaken, Ba B'Yamim. Abraham came with his days in his hand because his days were numbered, but yet at the same time he took advantage. That is the blessing of David HaMelech. Wishing our members, Shabbat Shalom. Rabbi